Yes, hi all. I'm sorry, I just got back to my office from testimony, so um, are we just starting? I don't know where we are in the agenda. Have we not even begun yet?
We haven't begun because we were waiting for quorum.
Okay,
And yeah.
which we still don't have.
No, I think we're okay now. We're good.
Okay, we're all right.
Yep.
Right.
So we're recording.
Okay, that's why we're recording. Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone to the Just Transition Subcommittee meeting of the Vermont Climate Council. Today is March 16th. It's great to have another meeting, our March meeting. Kelly Klein as a newly appointed co-chair of the subcommittee is going to, so congratulations to Kelly and to Chase, actually both as new subcommittee co-chairs. Kelly's going to facilitate this meeting. I'm happy to do the welcome and the check-in if you want, Kelly, or I can have you do the whole agenda. It's up to you.
I can take it from here if you'd like. I thought it'd be weird if I welcomed myself as a co-chair.
I agree. That's kind of nice to have.
So thank you.
Be done for you. But yeah, we're really excited to have Kelly as the council representative be a co-chair to the subcommittee. Also excited to have Chase. So Chase has just now entered 4 months of family leave. So Chase isn't sure how many meetings, being a first time at home caring for his dad, he'll be able to join for meetings, but he'll join as often as he can. So we'll continue to kind of send him correspondence and love to see him when he can make it. So yeah, Kelly, I'd love to both join the congratulations and welcome to you as co-chair of the subcommittee and hand it to you for facilitation today.
Thanks. That's great. Well, considering we started a little late, I was thinking we often will just have people put a little intro in the chat. You can put your name, if you have an affiliated organization or company or something, and something you're grateful for today. So I like that practice. So we'll just stick with that in the chat. I'll give everyone a moment. Nice comments. All right. So while people are maybe finishing up, I was hoping we could just go into some updates from the Climate Council. For those of you who don't know, we met in person for the first time on Monday, and it was a great meeting. Do we want to talk about the community engagement contract first? Jane, did you want to update us on that?
Sure. As part of the Climate Council meeting, with only a few hours to spare, right before it, we entered into a new contract that covers what traditionally was our facilitation, the role that David Plum has often played for the subcommittee and the council itself. But we also expanded the contract to not only be thinking about facilitation services for the council and its subcommittees, but also to think about public engagement and then more specifically targeted community engagement. And so I'm grateful as part of that contract to have 3 subcontractors as part of that, working closely with CBI, which include Indra and Kashka and Anna, who I haven't met Anna yet. I don't know her last name, sorry. But very excited to have Kashka and Indra helping us put forward the community engagement plan, which we'll be working over the next few months to really hone in and develop, but also be able to, at the same time, move forward with some of the work we've been talking about for a while with Mona and others in the community engagement task group. So psyched to have them on board. And it sounds like Kashka and Indra have not signed their subcontract forms yet. So they're not technically subcontractors yet. So today can be their last meeting as Just Transition subcommittee members, and then officially that they will have to resign from the subcommittee, similar to how Kaya Morris was part of the subcommittee for a while, but then came under contract. It's considered a conflict of interest. They'll still be very part of the work though, which is great.
Yes, I'm thrilled. When I heard that they might have to leave the subcommittee and then I found out why, I was like, oh, that's even better. This is great. We won't miss you at all. We'll see more of you, I hope. So wonderful. Yeah. So very excited to have more ability to get out there and do this. And so I'm sure we'll be getting more updates, hopefully at our next meeting about what the plan looks like. And if you wanted to see a preliminary thing at the Monday council meeting, David Plum did a presentation about the sort of the scope of the engagement work that they're planning. So you can go watch the video, but we'll fill everybody in. And then as far as that meeting on Monday, several of us were there, so I don't need to hog the mic about it, but I, as the counselor who's present right now, I can say it was a really excellent meeting. As I mentioned, maybe before the recording started, it was our first, no, just a few minutes ago, our first in-person meeting. And so a lot of that purpose of the meeting was just to help people build rapport without the forced little boxes of Zoom and get to know each other a little bit better. So that was definitely a success in that regard. I think we all got a great opportunity to speak one-to-one and also have more organic conversation during the actual meeting itself. I'm not following the chat super well, but I didn't know if, I don't know if it would be helpful for someone to send a link to like the page that has the agenda and the videos in case anyone was interested about it. I did have, just for my reference, some of the things we did. So we wanted to, one of the primary things was really reflecting on how we can better integrate equity and justice into the work of the council. And that was awesome to have that conversation. And I think there were lots of sharing and lots of thoughts. And a lot of what we ended up doing was laying some groundwork for future conversations, and just getting some of the initial more difficult bits out of the way so that we can then come back and finalize some of the things that we discussed. So we also wanted to talk about what's our strategy, because before July 1st, 2025, we need to revise the initial climate action plan. So what does that look like? How do we get from here to there? And we also have a couple of things that needed to be addenda to the initial plan. And so one was about transportation, and that's moved pretty far. The other was the biomass issue, and we talked a little bit about that last month here. That hasn't fully made it into voting on by the council and being an addendum, but that's also really important and something that is going to be tackled soon. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there may be other iterations of those things that we want to flesh out before, probably before the actual revision, but I wasn't exactly sure if there was more work to be done with, say, the transportation addendum. It sort of sounded like that from some of the folks on that task group. So anyway, not to get too much in the weeds there. So it was great to really talk a lot about our role as a council and identify some areas where we needed to get more clarification, and about who we are, what we're doing. And then one of the other things that came up, and I think this is really important and something that I wanted to share with this group, is that we feel like, in addition to wanting to communicate better with the public, we feel like there's also some communication that needs to be better between the subcommittees, from the subcommittees to the council and so forth, and also from the council to the subcommittees, making sure everyone understands our roles, what we can and can't do, because we all want to do so much, but there's only a certain amount of capacity, time, funding, and also certain things that are just outside of our purview as the Climate Council. And we don't make the laws, we just say, hey, legislature, or, X department, this is what we want you to do. And there's even a question about whether the council can say you have to do this, or this is our, we're in an advisory role. So a lot of groundwork laid, as I said. Not a whole lot was finalized at that meeting, but it will be soon. Jane or Kashka or Marion, anything that I missed that, and others might have been on the call, I don't know. Yeah, Kashka, did you have something?
Yeah, I think it's important what you just mentioned. I think, so just kind of like Just Transitions had, we had sat down and thought about, okay, well, what's our role and what are we really doing? And not just what are we really doing, but what can we do? What is our scope? What are we legally allowed to do, in a sense? Or are we advisory? Are we looking over things and allowing them to go from us? Or are we just putting together criteria for others to follow? It can get really confusing, and I don't think a lot of the public knows that there are legal issues. And I think that's what came out of the council meeting that I thought was actually really important, that not everybody was on the same page. And so there was some confusion. I think that's why Kelly is saying, it's something that is going to be talked about a little bit more, just to figure out exactly the role that the council plays. Is it an advisory role only, where things are brought up so that the legislature can take a look at them and they're brought up to the forefront? Or are there, other kinds of, sorry, that's my dog and her bone. Or are there other things that legally require the Climate Council to actually make decisions that are legally binding? Am I getting that right, Jane? Because I thought that was actually quite important. And I thought that, it went hand in hand with kind of Just Transitions trying to figure out our role and making sure that it's clear, not just to us, but to the public at large. So I thought that was great. And I also thought that it was a great meeting. It's great to see you all.
And I would say one of the things that came at the end was there will be reevaluation of the roles that our task groups and our subcommittees are playing going forward. And I said, well, good news, Just Transitions has already been talking about this, so we'll have some suggestions, but I think it will be the steering committee primarily who will be working on fleshing that out a little bit more and helping everyone know what their roles are. But I think they would welcome us saying, hey, this is what we think we should be doing, because it'll save them some work. And then one other thing, speaking of task groups, some of us here have been on task groups, or you may have heard about task groups, and a lot of the work that was done in those groups, we're hoping to bring it back to the subcommittee level, and then potentially bring things from the subcommittee level that maybe were more cross-cutting across different subcommittees, bring those up to the council level so that there's more transparency in the process and more people able to weigh in on some of these issues, especially now that we're in sort of revision mode and not just the initial draft, which was just so massive and such a huge undertaking. We had to divvy it up a lot more. Jane, Marion, anything else that you think we need to add, or any questions?
I thought it really started great, the meeting, and was admittedly just a little discouraged that we weren't able to really signal clear next steps. I always feel like the council needs like another hour. And one of the things I'd actually love this committee's reflection on is, and something we with the steering committee and the council, I really do think need to grapple with, is how we deal with public comment. We've reflected on it in the past before, and there's a lot of comments where people want answers. The council doesn't tend to engage in answering. we haven't explicitly said the public comment period feels fraught with challenge for me on like not doing it justice, while also just then not planning enough time for it. That's something I took away from the meeting. One, feeling like I wanted clear next steps, which is like my nature, and then two, also really feeling like the council needs to talk again about how they engage with the public in these meetings.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a good point, because as we're talking about public engagement, and this is definitely part of what we, our committee is one of the things we're sort of responsible for is helping with that. There's so many different ways to engage with the public, and that's why I'm excited about this new public engagement plan, because it has multiple different ways of engaging with different people and respecting that different people have different needs or levels of involvement that they want. But yeah, the public who come to meetings and want to share often come with different desires. Some people just want to tell us things and make sure that their opinions are heard. Some people want to come with questions, and then it feels really weird to be like, thank you for your comment. And they're like, but I'm at the question, can you answer me? And sometimes we don't have the answer, which we should just tell them. So anyway, these are my opinions about that, but I agree there's never quite enough time. At the end of the meeting, we had, I think, only scheduled like 15 minutes for public comment. And we had 5 people, I think, who commented, but it took up an hour at the end of the meeting and didn't leave us much time to wrap up. And some counselors had to leave. And so, yeah, the ending sort of petered out instead of ending with like and now we're done moment. So good takeaway there, Jane, and something that this committee can help potentially with, because I think there's been a lot of frustration from some members of the public of just not feeling heard. And how can we, I think people have been heard in many cases, but the fact that they still don't feel like they've been heard is a problem. And so doing better with that. Yeah, Kashka, you were there. You have your hand up.
I definitely, I completely agree with Jane. I think that it can be like a runaway train, and that's something that perhaps also I had jotted it down. Like if we can see how we can better facilitate the public comment, and when we say we're going to get back to you, really make sure that we get back to any questions that people might have. I think that would allow for people to be heard, or at least it would. That's tricky, right? Because to me, I think there's some people who it doesn't matter how loud or how often they speak, they still might not feel like they're being heard ever. So to that sentiment, you know, I think that there's a time and place to do those things. I think that we have to allow a certain amount of time for each person, and then say, hey, this is something that we can take elsewhere. So we can talk about that more in this meeting, and I'll certainly make notes for us as well, for the consulting team to kind of, take a delve into that, because it is important and everybody should have a chance to be heard. That's the whole point of public comment. Like I said, you're not going, people are not going to feel satisfied, especially there's people who are just never going to feel satisfied no matter what you do. But that's just part of it. And I do have to agree that something needs to be done about that, though. Like we have to hone it down a little bit, but thank you.
Yeah, I jotted down a note. I think if we can make this fit into our agenda next meeting, I think that'd be a great thing to spend a little bit more time discussing. And maybe we can have some thoughts for the council. Great. I want to move us along because I'm looking at the time and we will not run out of time for this, Indra. It's happening. So you want to just take it from here?
Sure. Hello, everyone. And I think, again, this might be my last Just Transition public service one, but we'll see. In the email that I sent out, I requested that we all keep our camera on, at least for the first 5-10 minutes. And I see 2 individuals. I don't know if part of the Just Transition subcommittee or not. for the purpose of the exercise, it would be great if the cameras were turned on. If it is inconvenient and whatnot, I do understand, but it would help me a ton. Sang and Pat, I'm naming, sorry. So I want to start by recognizing a fact. And the fact is climate change will impact us negatively. All of us, people, animal, flora, fauna that survives on this planet. If you are a creature surviving on this planet Earth, leave your camera on. And this feels uncomfortable with two people with camera off. That's where I apologize. I'm not trying to box you into any categories. If you're a creature that survives on planet Earth, leave your camera on. If you're not, turn off your camera. Okay, with two individuals being there, we recognize that they're not participating, just for the record. And some of the facet of identity will feel uncomfortable because not all the identities are visible. And if that makes you feel uncomfortable, I recognize that in the beginning. Happy to process that as a fellow human being after. Happy to jump on a call, but sometimes we need to be uncomfortable, and that is okay. If you are a Vermonter, identify as a Vermonter, or live in Vermont, leave your camera on, otherwise turn off your camera. As that is happening, I'll read something. In the coming decades, climate change in Vermont is likely to harm ecosystem, disrupt agriculture and winter recreation, and increase some risk to human health. Vermonters will be impacted. People in Vermont will experience spatially increased risk from precipitation, heat, and flood due to climate change over the next 30 years. Now, if you are somebody who identifies as coming from low-income family, had to rely on public benefit in your lifetime, leave your camera on, otherwise turn off your camera. Low-income communities already have higher rate of many adverse health conditions, are more exposed to environmental hazard, and take longer to bounce back from natural disaster. These existing inequalities will only be increased due to climate change. Poorer households are the least able to prepare for and recover from the impact of climate change, such as heat wave, poor air quality, flooding, and other impacts. Everyone may turn their camera on. Again, just observe the room. There's nothing. If you identify as a person of color or a member of the BIPOC community, leave your camera on, otherwise keep your camera off. Race is the biggest determinant of environmental injustice. Historical lack of affordable land, political power, mobility, and financial resources has impacted communities of color. Climate change will only make the situation worse, putting communities of color in more dire circumstances. Now, all of us can turn our camera on. Again, if you're somebody who is from the Native American community, Abenaki, other tribes, leave your camera on, otherwise turn off your camera. Native Americans and Alaska Natives are 48% more likely than other groups to live in areas that will be deeply impacted by flooding for sea level rise caused by climate change. Communities may also lose their culture. Everybody, we can turn our camera on. And finally, keep your camera on only if you identify as Black and African American, otherwise keep your camera off. According to the EPA report published in 2021, Black and African American individuals are projected to face higher impact of climate change for all 6 impacts, from health from changing in air quality, extreme temperature, disruption to weather exposed workers, and flooding threat to property, compared to all other demographic groups based on gender, race, ethnicity, income, and age. Let's turn all our camera ons. With that, I want to open up the space. We sent the letter that was sent by Rejoice BIPOC, letter that was sent, the VT Digger article, where there is a frustration, and I'll add a value judgment as an individual and as a Vermonter, rightfully so, of not being heard, not having the seat at the table, not being listened to, not being responded to. Just Transition is a subcommittee that is charged with ensuring justice, equity, respecting those voices, and that's what we strive to do. And we saw what we saw. And we read the letter, we saw the VT Digger article. What comes to our mind? With that, I'll be muted. And let's not follow the rule of raising the hand. Open up, speak up. If there is a need, if 2 people are talking at the same time, so be it, we'll manage.
Okay, sounds good. I think it's true. I mean, I think that partly it's kind of, I remember when I joined, I thought, man, there's just not enough diversity in this crowd that I see, right? And at that point, we still had Kaya and a few others. We definitely had Beverly, and but that's the thing, when I think about, okay, so when I think about Vermont, and I've lived all over the states. I lived in, Southside Chicago, New Orleans. I've really lived all over the states, New York, Boston, Miami, Las Vegas. Anyway, Vermont is white. When my friends come visit me, I mean, it's kind of, well, they think it's funny. They're like, wow, this is my friend, for example, my Lebanese friend who came up here, he's like, this is the whitest state. Is this the whitest state? Gosh, what is going on? So I think that the representation, obviously where I live in Burlington and the Old North End, it's a lot more diverse. And the places that I've lived in Vermont, it's a lot more diverse. It feels more like, I'll probably be, trash talk at some point for saying this, but it feels more like my people. I'm used to that. I've always lived in big cities, and typically in places that, others perhaps more affluent, or I don't know, maybe wouldn't want to. Spanish Harlem was one. But that's the thing. It's really hard. I feel like there's so much finger pointing at all the subcommittees and as well as the Climate Council. But I know that I've reached out to quite a few people from the BIPOC community that I've known here for as long as I've been here, for over a decade. And they're just not interested. And I think that it goes back to even some of my neighbors who are Indigenous, or who would be considered Indigenous, they're just not interested. And one of the main reasons is something that we tackled here in the Just Transitions, I think last go around. It has to do with compensation and having representation in the government, in different things like the Climate Council. It's one of those things that it does come with privilege, because it takes time out of your day. I'm often so filthy from, one job or another coming in here, sometimes camera off, driving. I mean, you guys know. So it's really difficult to get representation because there's no compensation. So I'm just talking straight out, I don't think it's of anyone's fault. I think we can do better. I think we need to do better, especially in just transitions. And hopefully that's going to change with the new cycle of compensation that should be coming through, I believe, right? So that's what I needed to kind of put out there. Anyone else?
Hey, thank you, Kashka. Share a lot of what you said. I was born and raised in Georgia, very different racial makeup than Vermont, but I also feel like it's important to acknowledge, and I have to remind myself of this. I often fall into this trap that Vermont is really, really white, but it's not exclusively white. And I think we do a disservice to people of color by talking about Vermont as if it is all white, because it's not. It's very white.
It's true.
But I try and remind myself of that. Also, I've lived also in Vermont for almost 2 decades now. And I've had multiple Black women friends move away from Vermont because they did not feel comfortable or happy here. And the friends who I have who have remained in the area get so many asks that I don't feel willing to ask them anything from this. I come to this subcommittee as part of my job, and I don't feel willing to ask anything of them because they get shit asked of them all the time. Long story short. And I think other people are familiar with that dynamic. But I also just want to note that I've been part of this committee since last summer. One of my first meetings was one of the meetings where Beverly Little Thunder was trying to speak up about behavioral and cultural shifts, and her comments were following the agenda was prioritized over authentically engaging with the comments that she was offering. And as a result, we lost that member of the subcommittee who, her wisdom, what she was willing to bring was a gift, and we lost that through our behavior, I think. And I don't have a clear solution for it. Just while we're sharing, I want to take my own part of responsibility in that. I think compensation is a big part of it, but culture is a big part of it too. And I would love to do better with y'all.
I will recuse myself from the responsibility of a facilitator and be a Just Transition Subcommittee member, and the only one who had the camera on when I said, if there is anybody BIPOC. Two things, right? Like one, oftentimes I worry about this notion of tokenism. Am I invited because? And that is a heavy feeling because I don't represent any community. Even in my family, my experience is entirely different than my mother's, who works as a housekeeper. If she could, and I could, I was not pressuring 7 days a week and probably 12 hours a day because she loves doing that. I have the privilege of working from my desk and lecturing people once in a while, right? Like there is a drastic difference. So that notion of tokenism worries me oftentimes when I show up. And the second thing is this, even the culture, even when we talk about race and racism, one discomfort that I feel, and I've talked to a lot of, I can't say all the people of color feel that way, but one of the things is like often being boxed. There have been times like when I go into, different areas and start talking, and it's like, oh, the BIPOC community, the former refugee community. And I'm like, have you seen my resume? Do you want to bring yours too? We can compare, right? And how are we seeing people of color when they show up? Also low-income communities, also rural community people, right? Like people who haven't attended college, when they come and they offer something, it is like complaining, But when people in the position of power offer something, it's thoughtful. Not too long ago, when I didn't have this fancy degrees, I had to fight for $15 an hour and had to justify by preparing a couple of PowerPoints. And now I can charge my rate, and all of a sudden it's like it is accepting. And there are spaces where I go and people are like, Indra, could you not speak that way? I'm like, fuck it. I will, because that's what brought me here, right? And that entire culture comes in there. How are we even seeing people of color? That worries me as a person of color who's also a professional and happy to really sit down and go through 1,200-page bill together and dissect it. Because that's what I studied. It's not only people of color, right? And I want us to kind of like, look at the bigger picture as well, because I say this very often when after George Floyd's murder, I started to see all the organizations putting this Black Lives Matter flag, statement about equity around my neighborhood, no matter where you come from, sign, Black Lives Matter sign. Some of my friends were like, the world is changing, the wave of revolution is coming, people will recognize. I said, no, I'm worried. Because if people could wake up and watch a video and wake up and really transform all the deep-rooted racism, anti-Blackness in a day, this world would be a better place. I have gone through that journey. I grew up in a culture that was anti-Black. Colorism was real. I still work until today on that colorism that I was raised in, the sexism that I was brought with, the transphobia that I grew up with. And I advise organizations on how to be inclusive, and I have to take a pause every single time and say, I will mess up. I grew up in that culture and I will mess up. If it takes that much in my personal journey, just because they saw that video and all of a sudden their statement, I was like, this is all bull crap. And people were like, you're always cynical. Look at the progress. People are hiring DEI director, the equity work. 2 years later, take a look around and see how many organizations in the cities are keeping those equity directors even until today. People are resigning. They are not there. And we are not talking because the video is gone. Our awakening, that wokeness is gone because it was not the issue that we really thought about. It takes time to really confront. It takes time to make mistakes. I don't anticipate people to be perfect. Like I said, I'm very imperfect human. I have a lot of unlearning to do. So for us, if we want to do this work, I don't think it's only about, like changing a policy, blah, blah. It takes that too. But I think we have to do this interpersonal work. And when we see something in the system, if it doesn't work, stop asking about the logistical piece and, the procedure and whatnot. That comes only when people are uncomfortable. I have seen this country spend billions of dollars when a private company is struggling, no questions asked. Oh, the community scholar, let's spend some money. The fiscal responsibility and oh my God, no, it's telling, right? So in our organization, in our work, when there comes a time when it is not politically convenient, if it is 2012, 2013, when even saying Black Lives Matter and organizing protests on the street of Church Street in Burlington got you the level of terrorist, people called you troublemaker, they didn't invite you to the meeting. That happened to me. People wanted me not to be at the meeting. And now all of a sudden, Indra, could you please? And I'm like, on my calendar, I can't find the time. Times have shifted, right? That is what it takes. The equity and all those discussions, it's happening right now. I'll tell you, 5-6 years down the road, and I hope to be mistaken, this won't be on the agenda. There won't be federal funding to focus on equity. There won't be philanthropists throwing money on the equity. At that time, can we rise up and still question, where are the people of color here? Are we listening to them? If we can do that, I think we can get there. With that, I'll resume my facilitator role. And again, feel free to just jump in anytime there is no structure.
I really appreciate all the other comments. I want to add something else into the mix, which is that government and bureaucratic structures are have a foundation in capitalist white structural violence. And I think it's really problematic. And I see that as one of the fundamental tensions in trying to engage people in this process that is so drenched in a formal government process, and the frustration that people have in trying to engage in this work, and yet the structure and the way that we do this work and the inflexibility of government to do its work differently. And I say that as somebody who works in government and believes in public service and believes in changing the way that we do our work. But I think that as I see people frustrated or saying, or just the conversation Kelly was raising earlier around how we manage public comments, and Jane's frustration with that, and others' frustrations with that is one example. Or the inability to compensate people appropriately, or the inability to engage in more creative and ongoing dialogue that is even outside of a public meeting structure, right? To actually build trusting relationships so that we can do this work together. Or the inability to move beyond procedure and procedural issues towards actually doing and implementing, right? These, I think, are the fundamental frustrations that I hear over and over and over again. And I think one of the frustrations is that we keep talking about them because, frankly, that's what government and formal processes does really well, is talk, and the inability to take action on a timeline that is responding to them. And so when people say you're not listening to me, we are absolutely listening to people. We are just not taking action. And that's the distinction. And I actually wish people would say, stop saying you're not listening and start saying you're not taking action. Because I think that's what I'm hearing anyway, when I hear people say you're not listening. And I agree. I think we're absolutely listening. I'm here, I'm showing up every time, I'm doing the homework. I'm showing up for in-between groups. I'm sending and having individual one-on-one phone calls and emails with members. I'm willing to show up and do the work. And I'm listening, but sometimes the action is just not happening fast enough. And so where I said that feels like the most frustrating element. And I actually think there are creative ways that we could have been doing things differently along the ways. But I think one of the challenges of that, of course, is that I don't rule the world. I don't get to just make decisions about we're going to do it differently this way, right? That we're trying to do this through this frustrating process. And, so if some things were just the decisions of this group, or even the co-chairs, or even one individual, I think we may have taken different actions as a climate council or as government. But I think it's just really challenging. It's just a really challenging structure to work within. So I just want to name that as part of what I feel like has been an ongoing frustration, and why it feels like people that we have worked hard to engage in this process drop like flies. And I think sorry, that maybe is a bad analogy, but it feels like it's not just Beverly. We have lost a lot of people along the way in this work, and not for lack of trying, but maybe not that we've tried enough. But I don't know that it's just this subcommittee either. I just want to name that. I think it's a bigger frustration than is beyond the subcommittees. I want to create space for that. And thanks, Indra, for opening up the conversation.
My internet is failing, so I switched to my phone. But in about 2 minutes, I would like to close the reflection part and move on to something different. So if anybody wants to share anything, please do so. But again, if we don't finish it in 2 minutes, I'm totally okay. Time can wait.
I have to agree with Sarah wholeheartedly in so many respects too. I think it's really frustrating, especially like some of us who, have stuck it out on the subcommittee and have decided to kind of delve deeper into everything. But this is kind of out of our realm of area of expertise, if you will. And COVID not helping, Zoom meetings not helping, but government and the workings of government is not something that, especially, and I keep thinking actually about what Indra was saying. Oh, okay, so I represent the frontline communities in some sense, right? No, I really don't. I mean, I represent my own journey in a sense, and I hope that I can speak to the truth of so many others that I've spoken to, etc. But do I represent everybody? No. But it's really, there's a huge learning curve. You've heard frustrations from both Mona and I for so long, because when you don't really realize the workings of certain groups or their real roles, it's really hard to know when you're so ready to engage, when you are wanting to take action. But the capacity of our members to take action, the capacity of the Climate Council to take action, the capacity of other subcommittee members to take action is really limited by our roles. And I think that's another big thing that the public, or as far as like when you're doing public comment, oftentimes members of the public don't really realize that the majority of members have other full-time employment, and this isn't so there's a disconnect in understanding the roles of the committee and the subcommittees and the task groups, even from members. That's what I think.
I've been thinking a lot about especially since Monday when we were talking about how the council governs itself. And I've been thinking a lot about the council made a decision to go with the consensus model rather than, not even probably strict Robert's Rules of Order, but rather than going with the way of, Eric, I don't think you're supposed to have that. My son is holding a ceramic tea mug. Sorry about that. He's not even 2. Yeah, go find daddy. Sorry. The Robert's Rules of Order or whatever, however the legislature functions, has been called out as being a way to exclude people. And it's hard to learn, it's confusing. And if you're not sort of initiated into that and really trained on it, it's hard to figure out when you're allowed to talk, what you're allowed to say, what are you supposed to say. And then there's this embarrassment when you are supposed to say, I call the question instead of I motion. There's all these things and all these weird words. And so the consensus model, I think, is more equitable, but it's also confusing for people because then it starts to be, there's so little structure, people don't know what the structure is or what the rules are. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and what is a way to help everyone feel comfortable participating equally. And I think it's tough. And I think part of the problem is almost any way that you run a meeting, if someone wants to monopolize it or twist it to get the outcome that they want, and they're skilled enough, almost any way of running an organization or a meeting, almost any system, someone who's skilled enough can tweak it and make it do what they want. And so there's no perfect answer, but I keep thinking about how much we're missing out on by following these more rigid structures, things that feel very comfortable to people who've been initiated into it, and they're typically white. A lot of them are male, but that's not always the case. But it's not comfortable for a lot of people. And if it's uncomfortable for me, given my background, I can't imagine how uncomfortable it can be if you're also looking around the room and you're the only person of color, you're the only, you don't feel like you fit in some way. You never went to a meeting like this in your life. You're used to a completely different culture. It's going to feel really weird and foreign. And yeah, no wonder people not only don't feel heard, but don't even feel comfortable speaking up in those scenarios. So it takes a lot of courage, and I really admire the people who do. If you all are interested, going back and listening to the public comments from Anna at the Monday meeting, she explains that from her perspective in a way that I thought was really visceral, and how she's volunteered to do things anyway, even though she's scared. Anyway, that was a little discursive, but I've been thinking a lot about that, how to run meetings and how to invite people. Or maybe we don't need to have, maybe there are other ways to hear people's voices and have participation. And I think that's part of it too. And one of the things that I'm hoping for, and what I try to do, because I mean, I represent all small businesses, like that's ridiculous, is to be a listener to my constituents and try to listen and then bring what I've heard to you. And to the council. That's what I'm hoping for, but there's no formal way to do it. So it has to be like this creative ad hoc thing.
Thank you all for that. I'll quickly move into the direction of action in a bit, but I always come to this question of like, when I approach equity more from adaptive process and I say, forget about those diagrams and the process. It takes a little bit. Let's use a different model. People are like, can you write that down? It's like, no, that's not what I meant. Let go of that thinking that it has to be written and processed, like all of that, right? Just replacing the consumeristic idea that ruined the planet by saying, let's buy another thing. Good luck. That's all. But anyway, what I heard is, the idea of talk and being listened to, but where are the action? And I think I want to move us into that direction. But before that, and Zane, oh, perfect. It's worked. Okay, let me see if this works on my computer, because my computer is acting up today. And it's not working. Give me 1 second. Somehow I cannot share my screen, which I was planning on doing. I do want us to read this, and I don't know what we can do, but I do want us to read this. It was written by a subcommittee member, and I think it is great for us to just read it out loud. If somebody could volunteer and read it out loud, that would be great.
The patronizing and polite ignoring my voice of concerns led me to step back from the subcommittee. Nothing will change to heal the mess we humans have created in our climate. The council is just lip service. I felt like I was a token on the committee, so I left. I once had the energy to work towards solutions. Now I feel I can only address the problem by living in the best way I can.
Thank you, Kaska. And again, I want to recognize that that was a voice of a subcommittee member who represented our community. And when I named it, all the cameras were off today. I'll just leave us with that. And now, in the 9 minutes that we have, we talk, we brought this idea of taking action, and oftentimes I have seen us grapple with this notion of we don't know what we can do. And that will come up again if we move into that direction. But I want to honor that maybe we have already proposed some kind of solution, and there are certain things that have already happened in this subcommittee. I can't speak for other subcommittee members, but if you want, you can. For me to participate in this capacity, even before I took this new role, supposedly will be taking if I sign it, I would not have been able to, lead the facilitation for which I charge money to other organizations if it was not for one of the members to step up and say, I will find the funding within this subcommittee. That's why I came on board. Sometime And I am all about systemic change. We should change the system. Interpersonal is only going to get us somewhere. But sometimes what it takes is being uncomfortable and channeling the resources that we have. So, there have been some actions that have been taken. And in terms of thinking about action, I want to, contemplate on it and open up a Jamboard and allow you to write every single thought that you have. But we read the letter. Communities of color, people who are working with them are saying, we are not heard. No actions are taken to, benefit the communities, and you have been tokenizing us. And when I shared that, somebody from within, and I'm not gonna name, if you wanna identify yourself, that's okay, shared this with us in the group email. If somebody could read that, that would be great.
I'll read it. Thanks to everyone who has shared their feelings here, especially to Beverly for reiterating her experience and feelings despite having not been listened to multiple times already, and to everyone else who is tapping into both their emotional experience and their thoughts about how we understand ourselves as part of the problem. Hopefully also remain open to change so that we can move towards solutions. And there are solutions being proposed. My personal impulse is to share that I hope our subcommittee can full-throatedly and unequivocally endorse the open letter and to support the actions requested. Full stop.
Thank you. And I, as a subcommittee member, I'll use the Robert's rule because it can be a devil, but when you know it, you can do magic. And I learned my hard way that sometimes it can be useful. I have a motion to the group. The motion is to compose a letter as a subcommittee, fully endorsing the letter and asking the council to take the letters and the demands seriously and respond to the letter in a public way. Whether or not they will address, not up to us, but we can ask. I propose that. Is there any second motion to my proposal?
Yes. I have to say
Second
I
by
second.
Anna. Yeah, and now since I'm not the chair, co-chair, I cannot ask for the vote and the discussion. So if the chairs would like to open up the discussion, ask for discussion, any question, debate, I would
Can you
invite.
explain that one more time, Indra?
Yes, so
Explain
motion
the
is proposed, motion is seconded, and then there is a place for discussion and debate. I cannot do that because I'm only a member. The chair have to do that. Chairs will invite that and we can vote aye or nay. And if all of us, yeah.
Sorry, not about
The
that.
motion, my
So-
motion,
No, no, not your motion. You were asking for the subcommittee, just transition subcommittee, to write a letter of response and endorsement to Beverly's.
to
I mean,
full
I'm sorry, did I
endorsement
say-
to renews letter, to the renews letter that was sent to the Climate Council. Full support of the letter that was written
Oh.
to the, yeah.
Got it,
Recognizing it's a challenge and asking them to take, do a public statement in response to the letter that was sent.
Got it.
Subcommittee
Thank
asking,
you.
that's my, that was a part of the discussion. The chair should have opened that. See, Robert's rule in action, we'll make it work.
Yes, I was about to open the discussion, but Kashka went in and just started the discussion, which I also am totally fine with. I went to a Quaker high school, so I learned the consensus model from the Quaker side, which is you speak when you feel moved to speak. So, but yes, other discussion about Indra's proposal, motion. Oh, Sarah, yes, you're summarizing it. Thank you. Why
Yeah.
don't I? Yeah,
Yes,
why don't
those are just, I think everybody
read
has
the
the letter and has read the letter, but the specific actions that they're calling for are at the end of the letter. And so I just put those in the chat box for.
And so one thing I would note just for people's references, and this is where the question comes, some of these things relate to the Climate Council and what the Climate Council has the ability to do, but some of these things are specific asks of other bodies in Vermont, other groups of people. So we can obviously still, as a subcommittee, say, this is a super important letter. We are in support of all of what they have requested. And we would like, and we could even address our letter to the Climate Council and the legislature and whichever, I'm trying to think what other organizations would be involved. Environmental Justice Advisory Board.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I think that the letter is broader than just the Climate Council. Doesn't prevent us from making a statement saying that we're in support of the letter and the actions recommended. I think that we absolutely could do that as a subcommittee. And it has a two, maybe I would just recommend that letter go to the same entities that the original letter went to. And in addition to that, perhaps go to the Climate Council as well, so they know that we took that action. But that's a friendly amendment, as you would say in the Roberts. I would propose an amendment to the proposal on the table. This is where I don't like Robert's rules, but that's what I think I'm doing in draft in the Robert's rules world.
Yeah, there's a list at the beginning of the letter of who it was sent to, and also
I was actually proposing the amended motion. So I will amend my motion based on the discussion. I propose that we form a group to fully understand the scope of the letter and draft a response requiring an immediate response to the letter from concerned agencies. And in the next meeting, we can, discuss the full letter and vote either aye or nay to send that letter out. So that's my motion. The motion is to form a group now that will draft a response, understanding the scope of the letter. And in the next meeting, we can fully endorse the letter. But right now we are endorsing the motion to create that group and work on it.
that's clear. Do we need it seconded again, or do
For the amendment, I don't think so. Yeah.
is there any other discussion before we vote? Okay.
Not being very familiar with writing letters to government agencies, and this is not in contrast to anything that has been said, just to add to it, if there's anything else we can do to put weight behind the letter, oomph, authority, and I guess I would ask y'all, is there anything else we can do to make it as strong and impactful an endorsement? Maybe including accepting our own responsibility as a subcommittee for past harms. I genuinely don't know, but I would be open to anybody's suggestions of how it comes across the strongest, I guess.
And I think another way to do that is to actually list if people wanted to, although there's more vulnerability attached to this, to list the names of the subcommittee members and the organizations they represent. If they have organizations that they're specifically representing, I think that that's another way to add oomph to it. And perhaps something that could be discussed when we look at an actual letter next time.
I think it could also help if we, when we're drafting this letter, have specific things that we intend to do, because some of the harm came from this committee. So things that we intend to do differently going forward, or something like that. That might help.
Knowing it's 5:11 and 5:10 was our public comment, can we hold the vote now for the public comment and come back to this and vote and move to other agenda?
Perfect. Good. Yeah. Thanks for keeping an eye on the time. That's good with me. Anyone else have something they need to say now, or can we open?
I just had a question. Did Vermont Renew receive a response?
Yeah, I was
No.
wondering. We wouldn't necessarily know if they received a response from like the legislature though, right? They wouldn't CC us probably. So they may have received a response from somebody, but not from the council, not anything official. Correct. Okay. Yeah, good question.
Just the letter wasn't, just to be clear, letter wasn't specifically to the council.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was addressed. Yes, right. Yeah, yes, good clarification, Andrew. Yes, it was addressed to
the chair.
Yes, and co-chair, right? for,
She's people often say that Julie's the co-chair, but
or whatever
Julie
she is.
co-chair.
Yeah,
She's just
and
a
secretary.
counselor.
It was sent to two members of the council, but yes, the chair, which I think was maybe the intention was it would go to the full council, but it didn't until January. So, all right, yes, paying attention to time, we have members of the public here. Yes, please, Pat. Hi.
Hello. Takes me a little while to hit all these buttons. All right, we got it. Thank you. A couple things I wanted to comment on the public comment, and I really appreciate. I think it was Jane that was saying how it needs some tweaking, and I would be the first one to acknowledge that as a participant and also as someone who has training in facilitation. And just one of the easiest things for all of these councils, subcommittees to do is to just someone's comment, to just reframe it or summarize it. And that tells someone, you know, that they've been heard. The other is a question about how public comment is being mapped or tracked, because that's part of your measure of success is when the public comment and the work start coming closer together. And when Jane was talking, that I don't know if that's happening or whose job that would be, but that could be something really useful going forward. Anyway, and then the third thing was I was at the last climate council, the council meeting. And so to hear the reporting out, and I had a visceral reaction was, wow, there wasn't anything about the comments from the public. So that was just a real experience of someone who's sort of plugged in a little bit to what's going on. Not entirely, so probably representative of most Vermonters, or at least some Vermonters. But that was a perfect example of just like, wow, I was there and these people were passionate and talking, and it was like they didn't exist. No one in the reporting out about the council's meeting said, you know, this is what we heard from the public today, and just, you know, the bullets. So just for feedback, not meant as criticism, but it was, since we were talking about this, I just wanted to pass it on. So thank you for letting me have my say. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Pat, and appreciate you joining in so much and paying attention. And I also think that's a great suggestion of reiterating people's comments a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's excellent.
Yeah. And if there's training that chairs need, there's some very qualified people in Vermont to, you know, to do that kind of work. Mm-hmm. Because these are huge lifts that all of you are doing, and to not everybody comes with their kit of facilitation skills, you know. So, but they're all they're very learnable and really handy to have. So.
Oh yes, excellent. Yes. Well, maybe I'll just, I'll call you up about it.
Okay.
I'm all self-taught. Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it. I don't think I see anyone else from the public here. I would probably see a little box. Yes, Jane.
In response to Pat's comment, I just thought maybe folks would be interested to know we're hiring a community engagement and communications coordinator for the Climate Action Office. Really recognizing intentionally that we haven't really figured out a good system for taking in comment and being demonstrative of how government is responding to it. So that position closed on Monday. We had 45 applicants, which we're excited about, and we'll be hiring that position in the next couple of weeks. And that person will also sort of be the dedicated climate office staff for the Just Transitions Committee to help support the work of this committee too, in a way that I don't feel like has been fair to the committee with state staff not like dedicated here. So excited about having that person come on board.
That's really exciting. And also there was conversation, but no real solution about tracking public comment, and we learned the public comment portal had been closed. And right, is that true on the website?
Well, it's still open, but Marion and I felt like having it on the website was kind of doing a disservice because nobody was reviewing or tracking it. So it's still there, and it's an intention for us to think about critically how we use it. Like, but it was really set up specifically in the development of the plan, not for like to take comments all the time. And so thinking about how we use it for like long-term commitment to ways the public engages with us is something we'll be talking about and thinking about in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, we don't want it to be an echo chamber. That's no good. Danielle.
Before we get too far away from our motion, I believe we have to call it to vote.
Yes. So back to the motion, which would be to form a small group of us who would write a letter that was strongly supporting the Renews BIPOC Council letter. And we would address the letter to the council requesting that they publicly support this or respond to it. And potentially also send it to the other people who were CC'd on the original Renews BIPOC Council letter. And then that group would bring this back to the full subcommittee next time, and we could decide if we're, we could sign off on it or make edits or what we had to do and then send it out. Is that correct? Did I summarize that?
I am drafting the language of my motion like in a formal way, and I'm typing that right now.
Okay, that can also work. But if everyone feels like that is clear and I didn't say anything incorrect, we could also vote, or if there is any further discussion, I would entertain that now. Great. Are we okay with just doing a vote, or we don't officially usually use votes, we do consensus, but I'm happy to do that. All right. Well, I give you all a moment to just read this to make sure that all sounds good. Andrew put it in the chat. Yep. So
I give a thumbs up. I'm just not sure how to do it on my phone.
no, that's great. I think we can, we had a motion, we had a second, we can vote. We also can use the consensus model. So let's take a vote if everyone's ready. And all in favor of Indra's motion?
Aye.
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 Raise his hand. Any opposed? All right, it's so moved. So now the question is, who's going to do this? I'm happy to be part of writing it. And this is important. Oh yes, did anyone abstain? Thanks, Indra. Oh my gosh. All right. Yeah, I thought I saw that.
Wait, do I need to abstain? No, right? Indra?
You voted, right?
Not until today.
Okay.
Today is your last day. Okay.
I'm happy to be in a group also, Kelly, but I also want to recognize that sometimes one or two, maybe three people can do something better than 7 or 8 when it comes to working groups. So I'm happy to step out or step in either way.
Yeah.
And to Claire's point, staff didn't vote. So thank you, Claire. We know that's why you didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I'm happy to do it. I agree with Sarah that it should be just maybe 3. I think 3 is a good number. Get some different
I would
perspective.
hope to be a part of it. If we exceeded 3, I could just be a listener, but I'd like to be a
Great.
part of it.
Anna, that's great. Others, I mean, Indra, you proposed it. Do you want to help write it?
Yeah, I was like, I'll join as the sponsor. And one thing that I want to underscore, like I kind of went off my facilitation skill is there should not be a structure. And when the Roberts rule came in, I wanted to showcase to the public that will be watching that in the subcommittee, we know how the Roberts rule works. Not only do we beat consensus because we don't understand Roberts rule, but because that is an effective way of engaging. So if they had any question about us not understanding, we can nail it. So we did that. But that's not to set any standard or precedent for the future, because sometimes when you use a procedure using the same structure, they can use that as a preceding whatever procedure and can require that. So I just want to put it in the public record.
Thank you, Indra. I'll say you nailed it. I don't know about myself, but everyone did a great job. Yeah, so was anyone else particularly excited to help with writing this? I think anyone who's really excited to do it should say so, and we can get our group together. Good. So yeah, I'm happy to do it. I think Anna, Indra, Sarah, you and I could arm wrestle. I don't need more stuff to do. I just
Yeah, I mean, let's do it. I mean, I don't mind participating. I think I'll just name for those of us who are part of the administration, right? This is sending, of course, a strong letter to people. And so I'm happy to be a part of the letter writing so that we can hopefully thread the needle and be strong in a way that also feels professional and appropriate for those of us that serve in the executive branch. And I hope people appreciate that. I think I'm a full-throated person, so hopefully people know what I mean. I'm not meaning to temper it down. So if I think the four of us can write a great letter,
that sounds
Kelly.
great.
Okay.
Perfect. And I would appreciate your feedback and thoughts, because I don't always know I mean, I don't know about Anna and Indra, but I'm always liking to have someone help me with etiquette on these things. All right, so that sounds good. So Kelly, Sarah, and all right, great. We will circle up on that. Wonderful. Okay. Doing a pretty good job. We're a little bit behind. So our next thing would be to discuss how we want to give feedback on recommendations. So last month, it was a little bit strange and not quite as planned because Chase had to be in the car and kept losing signal. Yes, Kashka.
I'm so sorry. I just don't want to get going off that subject without saying something first. Have we discussed, or has the Climate Council discussed, like, in the event that something like this comes in again, a letter, because it sounds like this letter slipped through the cracks somehow. I mean, so what kind of contingency plans do we have in place, or what are we going to do differently so this does not happen again? Because this was not okay. This was not okay, you know, and so what can we suggest, or perhaps the group that's meeting on drafting the other response, how are we going to do things differently going forward? Because they need to be done differently. I mean, things do, but something like that cannot, I mean, no, it just shouldn't be slipping through the cracks, you know? So
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring that up.
I don't know if you have a response or anything, Jane, because I think that might be more.
I mean, I spoke to Anna just in an email, and, you know, just noted that the first time they sent a letter to the council almost 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, they also copied me, and therefore maybe I'm not as high up, so I have less of an excuse to say I missed it or something. But it went to the council quickly then, and it's not, I think our secretaries should be also responsible, and I suspect they will own that they messed up by not sending it on to the council or sending it on to me to send to the council. So, and that they shouldn't have to copy it to many people. So hopefully in the future, by owning the responsibility, our secretaries will do a better job of sharing it more broadly.
And one other thing I will suggest is going back to the same exercise. Sorry, Abby, you had your hand up.
That's okay, Andrew. Go ahead. I'll wait.
One thing is going back to the same exercise. When we have people who are out in the community doing the work, people know what's happening. We see it, and it becomes easier for us to bring that forward, right? So as we are serving in this committee, just transition, and we are paying attention. And if I do sign that contract and move forward, I will do my part of keeping a tab of, you know, what's happening in the community. But as an individual, one thing that we can do is build that connection within the communities in the time that we have. It will enrich our life, to be honest, having friends that we disagree with, see the world differently with. But also, you know, like we get to know that knowledge. And if you see something that's not covered by VT Digger or any of the news article, because not every single marginalized voice will be covered. And right now it's being covered because it's a hot story again, right? But when it becomes not the hot story, those letters will be coming up. And if we can catch those and bring it to the council and simply say, hey, listen, we have this, I think we can do it. This can be a model moving forward.
I just wanted to suggest to the subcommittee that draft the letter for us to take a look at and consider at our next meeting, to maybe offer that as a recommendation in the response letter for the supporting agencies and the council to consider a more foolproof process for how comment can be received in that way and ensured a response. So I think that's, to me, feels like a real tangible suggestion of how to do things differently that could be captured. Not that we have to figure it out, but that we ask them to figure it out.
Yeah. And it's always tricky because if every single comment was shared with the full council, that would be tough. But this was clearly, as far as I am concerned, past the bar of it should have been shared. It was a very important letter. So, oh, and thank you, Indra, so much. I really, really appreciate you guiding us through that conversation and all of that. I really appreciate that. So thank you. Okay. Ready to move on to the next agenda item? Is that good timing? I don't want to cut things short preemptively. So sorry if you're hearing, and you probably can't hear too much on the background, but people are screaming in the other babies. So yeah, so last month we were reflecting on, so Chase did he went through with the biomass task group recommendations and did the just transitions rubric that we developed. And he went through and he filled it out as best he could. It was really him doing a first take at it, a very rough draft. The hope was that he would be able to join us on video, but he was driving through the mountains and kept losing signal. So it wasn't quite how we expected it. But this brought up a big question in general. How do we want to interact with other subcommittees, the council and task groups on helping them engage in these principles? What structure will work for us going forward? I don't know if people had reflections from last time or suggestions. And so, you know, we have noted on the agenda, and someone, if there was like a more specific thing we were going to discuss, I think it was more of just an open discussion, but how, you know, how do we give feedback? How do we hear people's first take on it? What makes sense for us? Last month was a little bit crazy, but I think we learned a lot from that experience. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts and what I think let's just start with that. People's thoughts about that and what worked well and what maybe we want to do differently in the future. And I'm happy to let people just jump in or raise hands. I saw Sarah, then Abby, then Jane.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this. I think a couple of things. One is that we realized that things were scored, but there's actually questions. The scoring is actually supposed to go in tandem with the questions. And I think we should be asking people to answer the questions, because there was a frustration that came up, which was, no, we did discuss that and we have thought about this, and this is part of our thinking, informed our thinking in this way, but it wasn't necessarily clear in the actual written proposal, the summary that they were, you know, presenting back to the council for a vote. So that's one thought, is could people do the questions and the tool? And then the other thought is just a general thought is sometimes some and Abby and others, to the extent that this was done, great. And I'm sorry, it's not a criticism, but I wondered if like some pre-work with who's ever presenting, just like a little prep meeting can be helpful to say, you will have 30 minutes on the agenda. the first 5 minutes, you should probably just talk about the proposal in general. The next 5 minutes, you should provide an overview of, or like whatever, however we want to structure those, but to like help people prep that so that there's also enough time for us to have some back and forth conversation. And also to set some shared expectations that about the time that's available. Because I think that was the other frustration that was happening, was that we didn't have a structure on how we were going to go through it. And so not talking through all of it wasn't gonna, we didn't hear enough time she's going to talk about this. So my internet's unstable. I'm done.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the expectations on both sides. We did talk with Chase, but then he wasn't available. So that was the other thing. So yeah, Abby.
Yeah, I really appreciate those suggestions. There was a feeling that I had, and even as being part of the group that helped try to prepare for this presentation prior to last month's meeting, that Chase was almost presenting as a just transition subcommittee member, not as a biomass task group representative or liaison. And I think that to me, as I reflect back, was part of where there was sort of like a disconnect in process and intent, because the way that going forward, I think would be helpful would be if the task group or the subcommittee that's drafted the recommendations or has the questions comes to us, does that kind of 30-minute or whatever kind of scripted presentation where we get to ask questions, where they get to ask us questions about the rubric or the questions and the guiding principles. But it almost felt like it was occurring in reverse, in that Chase was sort of representing the subcommittee, talking to the subcommittee about the biomass task group recommendations. And there was just something about it that didn't, I don't think, really follow our kind of greatest intentions. I hope that's clear.
No, and that's helpful because I had a slightly different interpretation, but that's why it was confusing. Jane.
I guess I was hoping that maybe you guys would be willing to sort of like dissect the process into two parts. One, like the recommendation from the subcommittee could be focused on how a task group or another subcommittee applies the equity scoring rubric collectively prior to coming to the subcommittee. And Chase, we all have been thinking a lot about that since the meeting, and clearly it wasn't done appropriately for this first time because it was just one person. And then if that process could be sort of spelled out in a way that felt thoughtful and careful, the second part of the process, which is sort of like this presentation discussion by Just Transitions of the application of the tool by another task group or subcommittee, I would challenge you all to think about how that's done where it's a value add. And my feeling about it is largely because like these recommendations for biomass, you know, they took 9 months of a lot of presentations, a lot of discussion. I just don't, I'd be curious to see how it's done well, that they can explain that succinctly in a way that you all can really understand in 30 minutes. So I've been wondering if there's a way to sort of put a process out there that empowers the task group in a way that makes you feel like they're being used appropriately and thoughtfully, that actually didn't then have them come here, or if they did really think about what the value add is by having the whole subcommittee think about them, because biomass in particular, I also acknowledge it's a really hard one to start with because it's really hard. But for what it's worth for biomass, we've been thinking that it would be really good if every one of the task group members applies the rubric, and as Sarah just mentioned, and we would add in the questions too, and then collectively came together to reflect on any takeaways that they hadn't thought about collectively as a group, and then sort of reflect that in the equity scoring rubric or the questions, not each individual's thoughts on it, but collectively, where were the gaps and what were the problems?
Yes, Andrea, please.
Yeah, maybe it's a long-term thing, right? Like one thing that would help us really clearly is what I call, what do we mean? I think there is certain level of engagement that we need to like really define what we mean. I don't know if collectively we have the clear understanding of what we are even asking of the organizations. And the second thing is context really does matter, because I have audited different organizations. If I simply go there and start auditing based on my understanding of what equity looks like, trust me, it will be all F. Get rid of the organization, restart. But there is a context in place, and that needs to be recognized. So I think like, one thing that we can do is create a template that the organizations can submit before we even do the audit. I generally ask for the context. When was it created? In response to what? What was the process like? Who was involved? What did you do? And questions and challenges that came in the middle, right? Like if there is an organization that was struggling to even entice a certain communities of, marginalized communities to apply in the beginning, and all of a sudden there are only 2% of marginalized community in the board, that's not a failure. They're trying, there is more to be done, right? Like I'm not saying that's a perfect thing. So those questions and challenges, if we provide that template to them, that would be helpful. But maybe for the upcoming time, now that I'm exiting and I won't get to spend time with y'all, like a retreat where all the Just Transition Committee member can come together and really define what it is that we mean. For all of this, I started with the Just Transition guiding principle, and we didn't go too far with it, but right, creating a clear understanding of what it is that we mean when we say certain thing will really help. Because sometimes I hope that we all see the world the same way, but sometimes we may not be understanding the world the same way. So having that clear framework among ourselves, even in the equity audit guiding principle, and prioritizing certain thing that we want to do, having entire day spending on it, a retreat would be a great idea, just so that we all have the same clarity. After that, it can be, Chase or somebody auditing it, but we have the clear understanding. So that might be a long-term thing, but creating a template for context, process, question, and the challenges, just so that people can respond, would be a great start.
Yeah, that's great. And I was thinking about the context thing. That was my big thing, was the context in which they created this, but also the content of the recommendations didn't necessarily fit with some of the questions in the rubric, because it was, well, no, we didn't engage these communities. The recommendations were to engage these communities. So it wasn't like they didn't have good equity intentions. They just didn't do the thing yet. But the recommendation was, we need to do this engagement. So I was like, yeah, Chase, you're kind of in a tough position here with this. The way we framed the rubric makes you look like you didn't do your work, but that's where the context matters. So Claire.
Thanks. I don't know if this fits, but it just strikes me that it feels like in terms of process, the questions really should be or could be used in a helpful way from the very beginning of a task group with a specific task like this, to frame the work that's being done. It could even be like a living document that is maintained and filled out throughout the whole process. And that's how you get like well thought out, succinct documents, right? They're reviewed and revised and added to, and you identify gaps in what you're thinking throughout the process. And I think of the way that, the, I guess, impact assessment that the executive branch has like bolded questions that in theory you start with. They're just like a subset of all the questions you're supposed to answer. By the end, you're able to answer like all the questions, but it feels like if the process was starting with these questions to guide where you're going, and then at the end coming to the subcommittee with the questions answered, and then the rubric that scores how your recommendations kind of fared as a result of this process, that maybe would address some of the confusion that occurred.
Yeah, and hopefully people were using it, but I don't think there was a formalized way to use the questions as guiding. I have a question for the group here. I think it was Judy last month mentioned some of the questions that it was the equity caucus or something, and I was trying to find them. She read them, but I wanted to like look at the full list. and find the link, because I also had a feeling that some of that might have been formed after we did our, might have been crafted after we did ours and potentially inspired by what we had done. No one needs to find it now, but it was just a thing that I was curious if anyone had like actual access to that and knew what it was, because I was Googling it and couldn't find it. So
Yeah, I was just gonna say she put them in the chat.
yeah, she pasted them, but there wasn't a link and I was Googling it and I couldn't find it. So, and I think I lost them in the chat.
Yeah, I just want to say, I want to go back to like, I don't think what we created is perfect. And I think at some point we need to go back and iterate. But I do think that what we created was different than sort of an all or nothing kind of approach to these. Like, you must have this percentage, you must do this specific thing. I think what we created allowed for and to help shape policy and initiative and program development, whatever it is. It is created, I think, in a way that's really helpful. It doesn't say how you have to do engagement. It just says, are you thinking about, are you doing engagement with these groups, and who isn't? So I think that is actually really helpful in terms of what we intended for it to do, which was to shape development, right? To not necessarily to be an after the fact thing. I'm saying what Claire was saying before, but that feels really important to me, that we hold on to something that can be used in that way. But I think the frustrating aspect, and I would say I do want people to come to our subcommittee, because we wanted to create accountability, right? We created it. People should already be using it. Why aren't they using it? Well, if we tell them they have to come to our subcommittee and talk about how they used it and show us how they used it, then that means that people will, right? So that's the value add for me, is having people come, is that we know that they'll actually do it. And I know that adds work for people, but I don't know how else to make sure people are doing it.
Yeah, and I think it was nice because initially we had Kaya Morris helping and guiding people through it, which I was really pleased that was something that she was able to do, and that was before the initial climate action plan. But we need to keep using these tools, and I also agree, let's brush them off and make sure that they're still what we want, and maybe they need to be updated. Yes, Jane, and I also want to make sure that we don't lose track of wanting to look at this memo.
Yeah, just my final comment on that just is, just for sake of process around the biomass, we did review the equity scoring rubric at the beginning of the development of the task group recommendations. And, one way to hold people accountable, and I'm not saying this because I don't support coming back to the full subcommittee, because I think if that's the approach you all want to take, that makes sense too, but is that having liaisons on these task groups and subcommittees is another way to ensure, and to be clear that one of the roles of being a liaison is to ensure the equity scoring rubric is, I really liked what Claire suggested, sort of like a living and breathing document that is you check in with along the way as things are being discussed and talked about, and sort of kept a running tab of how you're working to address those issues as you're developing these recommendations. So that's another way too.
Yeah, no, that's all excellent. Last thoughts on this. I mean, this ties right into our memo, but I don't know if there are any little last things before we talk about this. I don't know if everyone had a chance to review the memo also, so we should probably put it up on the screen if someone has that handy. But while someone's pulling that up, were there any other last things specifically about that exercise? I think we have some really good thoughts to move forward, and maybe we can, I think, putting together like a form to fill out, basically, like what Indra was saying. We need to know the context. We want a little bit of the history of the timeline, how you developed this, who did you talk to when, because they put so much work into this thing, and it's not obvious from the fact that they somehow got it down to 2.5 pages, which is also so impressive. All right. Thank you. So I hope people had a chance to look at this. Oh, so yes, it was attached in an email before our meeting, but it's not linked online. So this is the draft memo, and I was reviewing it right before the meeting. I personally thought that it still made sense to me, but I didn't know if we wanted to take a minute to review it, have someone read it, or just talk about it. Assuming you all are about as busy as I am, if not more so, we maybe should have a minute to at least read it. Did we not send this? I don't know. I didn't think we had, but.
We did send it, yeah.
Oh, wait, we did. So wait, what are we, it says finalization of the memo.
And we talked about it at a meeting ago or
So wait, why is
two,
that on our agenda then?
because we never finalized it at the last meeting. So we talked about it in January. We did review it.
Right.
We were planning to finalize it at the last meeting, but we didn't get to that on our agenda. So I think this was designed to see if there was any finalization or language changes or tweaks that we wanted to do before we finalized it and sent it to the council.
Oh, sorry. When you said we sent it, I thought you meant we sent it to the council. That was.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we
Sarah's-
just, the subcommittee.
Sarah thought we had already sent it to the council. Is that what you were saying, Sarah? I may have misunderstood your comment.
That's what I meant, but it's okay. I'll clear it up now. We haven't sent it.
Great.
Okay.
So I guess anybody need more time to review it, or can we see if there's any comments, questions, things that need to be changed? Glaring typos?
I wonder if we want to make the recommendation, if we all agree about this being the utilization of the guiding principles being a living document that's reviewed, revised, and used as a guide to identify gaps. Sort of, again, Claire's suggestion, because I'm not sure that that's in here. Instead, we just simply identified these 4 suggestions of our function and role as a subcommittee. Or maybe that's not the appropriate place for that, but.
I'm so sorry. This is Kashka. I have not had a chance to review the whole thing, and so I apologize. It's on me, and I'm trying to read it off my phone, but that's not a good thing to go. Not a good thing to do.
Although Kashka, I don't think any edits have been made since we last looked at it together. Just so you know.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, Abby, I think that's a fine point. I think you're right, though. This letter is more about what we will do, not what we're asked, but I think there could be perhaps a statement at the end or towards the beginning that just says, encourage climate council subcommittees and task groups to continue to use the guiding principles and equity assessment, blah, 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 to throughout the development of proposals as a tool to guide the development of proposals or something like that, I think is what.
I mean, looking at the numbered part there that Jane is sharing, the before number 2, like after number 1 and before number 2 could be climate council subcommittees, task groups, and state partners will use the questions, the guiding questions, at the beginning of any new, developing any new policies or recommendations, and keep that as a living document. And then they should also come and present, that could be number 3, and that they come and present. I'm not articulating it very clearly, but I don't know.
I think you're describing, Kelly, as like a process, which is maybe a supplemental document. This was designed to be kind of like, what's the Just Transition Subcommittee's function and role around the utilization and the accountability around the guiding principles. I think maybe that's one of our to-dos, though, could be, if this is an approved approach to how we want to continue to engage with the council, the subgroups or subcommittees and task groups, that we might need to create a process document to remind people of how they could use it and what the expectations would be. But I'm almost now thinking, as you know, based on what you said, Sarah, and as I think about this further, that maybe that's just a separate, and maybe we add that as a fifth to do is that we would create a process document to share. Kind of what that relationship and process could look like.
I think it's implicit in there. I think it's, in the work of doing these 4 things.
Yeah. Number 4 has that tied into it. And also number 2, that they need to do they can't present an equity analysis if they hadn't done it. So, yeah, Indra.
Yeah, I mean, like based on the discussion that we had, I think all the discussions that we had is incorporated. So whoever wrote, like, it's succinct, but like for 3A, given our reputation among other subcommittees and one of the effective things that we have done, I would emphasize on making it be number 4 instead of 3A, and emphasizing the public engagement as its own thing rather than a part of all the strategy and recommendations and rule. I think that will speak volume.
So Indra, are you suggesting any language change, or just that 3A be a standalone
Probably like
strategy?
Yeah, not 3A, but 4 all public engagement should be brought to the subcommittee for review and input, and making it like 5 recommendations.
Mhm. I'm on board with that. Anyone else have a concern with that?
I'm just curious how that relates with the public engagement contract and the new community engagement position, like all the work that's being done. I'd love to think that this is a part of that process, but I don't know if we're working at odds with decisions and progress that's in the works.
I
Here,
kind of agree with Abby too on that. I'm not quite sure how it fits in.
I mean, like here, there might be a conflict of interest if I respond, but I'll be very honest, hold us accountable. Just because I'm paid tomorrow doesn't mean I don't have to answer. And it went back to like, when I was doing the public engagement through CAP agencies, some of you asked question, and there were questions about like, oh, was it like, were we marginalizing? And in my response to you individually, to those who I responded, I said, no, I am paid to do this work. And if you have to hold me accountable, hold me accountable. So if there is a public engagement plan that's being proposed by CBI, where, some of us might be engaged, like ask us to be here and justify why we are thinking that. Because just because we are doing this, like, I mean, this committee, of all the committees that I've seen, like y'all have been holding really dear public engagement as a, integral part of this work. I think we should be owning it. Like until 6 p.m. I'm a part of this committee. And after that, I may have a different role, but even if I'm in that role, don't let me off the hook. Hold me accountable. If we don't do that, then it will be messed up. So I think it should be a part. Like I think, CBI, if CBI is proposing a public engagement plan, we should come and give the same presentation that was given to the Climate Council, because more so than Climate Council, it's the Just Transition Committee that's been doing the public engagement plan. And I think y'all should be able to question that.
I agree with what you're saying, Indra. Then I do think that 3A needs to be, the language should be changed a little bit, because the way that it's written, or even if we were to write all public engagement plans should be brought to the Just Transition Subcommittee for review and input, it almost seems like it's not a informational and holding us accountable in the sense, it's to review our plans. I don't know. I feel like the wording needs to be changed on that one. I feel like it doesn't speak to what you just spoke to as clearly.
So Sarah recommended a little amendment, which would be public engagement plans of the Climate Council.
Right.
And also my my avocational lawyer mind is going, all public engagement plans. I think it could say public engagement plans related, or for the related to the Vermont Climate Council. And what I also would suggest, so rather than saying all, which might get a little, someone could, not that this is a legal document exactly, but do we want to also add that that we want to see the results. We want to be able to see the, hear the reports and all that. And I don't think we should overburden the contractors and have them have to report to us and the full council. So there might be something around that, and that's where the accountability is also. Tell us what your plan is, but then also show us that you followed through on it. So I don't know how that should be, or if we can just leave it at this for now. And I'm also keeping an eye on the time, so I don't want to drag this out.
I mean, I don't disagree, but I think it's okay as written. And I guess the priority for me is this. I feel like this document has been a year in the making. And to me, that's an example of how we're getting dragged down in process. And what feels most important is that we put it out there. I don't know that we're going to get to a perfect document, but I also don't want to shut down important substantive dialogue. And I think we learn a lot by doing that. So I would vote that unless we have major challenges with this, I would motion that we move forward with the document as presented.
Yeah. Anybody have concerns about moving forward with this as it is written right now? We changed one
Yeah, I'll
sentence.
just say I'm having a hard time keeping up with both the chat, the notes, and the editing this document. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I've captured everyone's suggestions. So I didn't mean to cut you off, Kelly. I just want to say.
No, that's fine. And thank you, Abby.
Miss.
I somehow thought this was Jane, so thanks for doing like all three things at the same time. So yes, this is why I'm saying as written. So the one part that we changed is visible on our screens. If you can read it, sorry, Kashka, it's small. Any concerns about this being our memo and hitting print?
The only one thing that I'm seeing is that there was reference to that it not just be the plans, but maybe the work or the efforts or the progress, whether that needs to be included. Again, I don't know if that's getting too nuanced and if the intent is captured in the new number 4.
And Abby, I know you're busy, and I suggested public engagement plans and periodic work progress related to. And periodic can be defined as we go along.
That makes sense to me. Okay. Any other updates or concerns about this? Hearing none, I'm going to go back to our consensus model and say that this is good to go. Speaking of which, I just realized that I didn't do minutes from last time, but I don't want to push us past. So perhaps we can just approve 2 rounds of minutes next time. If anyone has a problem with that.
Or if it's by consensus, we might just be able to say, are there any problems with the minutes?
Okay, sure. And if there's
None.
we'll go. So anybody have a concern or anything to change about the minutes from last time?
I noticed that they still listed the date as January.
Thank you. I don't know if who updates that, so.
I guess I do.
Can you do that? Any other changes or anything? Good.
Thank
All right.
you. Nice job, Kelly.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm running us over a little bit because we do want to make sure that we wrap up and know when our next meeting is. Which, would it be April 20th? That's what's on my calendar. Okay. Please, it's 4:20, please come sober. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Thank you again, Indra, and thank you everybody for being willing to participate in good, wonderful discussions.
Indra and Kashka, we can't wait to see you in your new role.
Yes,
Thank
indeed.
you, Terry. Thank you,
Sign,
Erin. Thank you, guys. Great to
sign
see
the
you.
contract, sign it.
Bye,
Have
you
a great
guys.
night.
Great to see you
Bye,
all.
everyone.